This is the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour podcast. Kane, Pittman and Olgun back with you for the first time in a couple of weeks. And before we even dive into the absolute chaos that we've seen in the NBL over the last couple of weeks, we don't really have a chance to catch our breath. Olgun, you took over this podcast with a level of professionalism that has really made me decide that I need to lift my game. You interviewed someone from every single team across the league, bar Cairns, I believe. If people didn't catch up with it, go to the YouTube page or the podcast feed. You can catch up with the fascinating stuff. Olgun, I was slightly concerned when I left, and now I'm more concerned that I might not have a job soon enough.
So you told us, like, hey, I'm going to be traveling. You're going to have to figure out the podcast for the next 2 weeks. And so I was like, all right. So I spoke with our editor, and the suggestion was go get maybe a player and do a longer form pod, or go get someone else to come on, maybe a Pete Hooley, maybe Derek Rucker, get someone else on just to fill the void while you're not here. And I thought that I'd be super duper ambitious and say, hey, why don't I get a person from every team and do like a check-in? And I immediately regretted it because the amount of logistics and admin it takes to get a player or a person from every single team, have to organize that. I was in Brisbane at the time for the Part 1 series, and so I'm dealing with a very awkward time difference of it's like an hour behind Sydney, Melbourne. So it was very difficult to organize. You couldn't keep it on a deadline as well. I couldn't say, all right, we're doing it on Tuesday because someone from the Perth Wildcats says, hey, I can only do late Wednesday morning. So look, I'm glad that we got that product out. I'm proud of how it turned out, but I'm absolutely not doing that again if I don't have to. Please don't leave me.
Yeah, we live and we learn. I had a quick little 3-day trip to Australia. I had a wedding of some very close friends. But the beauty of that was I did get to a throwdown. I got to Melbourne and Southeast Melbourne. So I can say that I've attended at least one NBL game this season. But since I've come back, I've been back to watching the games either in the middle of the night in the US or catching up in the morning. That's been difficult right now, Olgun, because there is games every single damn day. And we're going to try and get around some of these teams and some of the big topics across the league just for time code purposes, because we've been trying to figure out when we could actually pod. We are doing this on Friday morning, so we've just seen Melbourne United beat Cairns last night in Australian time, and we are going to recap the Christmas Day games. But tonight, we got Brisbane Illawarra, one of the more fascinating games in the schedule right now, two teams that are scoring a whole bunch of points. So we don't get to break that down. That one's coming up in a few hours' time. On ESPN, of course. But I think the best place to start is Christmas Day. And what was billed as game of the year, it made sense. Illawarra versus Sydney, best offense versus best defense, landed on Christmas Day. I think the league has to be thrilled with how that turned out. Maybe the tip-off time was a little bit late, I would say. They probably need to bring that a little bit earlier. You could have a 4 o'clock game and a 6:30 game rather than the 8:30, particularly for some of the reasons we'll get into. But just off the top, Illawarra get the win. They've really created a bit of a gap in the loss column now at the top of the standings. They look awesome. What was your initial takeaway as you walked away from this game?
So firstly, very late tip-off. 8:30 is so late. The first quarter of that game, very officious. There's a lot of whistles. There might have been 30, 35 free throws in that first quarter.
27, I believe, yeah.
The game got better. I thought it was a high-quality game. After that first quarter, the first quarter was stop and start. For the rest of the time, I thought it was a really solid game. I thought we saw great things from both teams. The Illawarra Hawks, I agree, they've separated themselves as far as the ladder, of course, but as an offensive team, they have remained a juggernaut throughout the season. That has been a constant. And over their past 6, 7, 8 games, they've improved defensively. They're above the league average defensively over that stretch of games. So that's really, really important. I've just written a story for ESPN.com.au that focuses on Tyler Harvey and his impact and how important he's been, because he's shooting better than he ever has. The efficiency is off the charts with Tyler Harvey this season. And I think that is because of the familiarity with Sam Froling, the connection he's developing with Trey Kell, who is playing outstanding basketball in his own right. It just looks like they're the team, and I mentioned this to Justin Tatum in the press conference, they're the team that looks like they figured themselves out the most so far. They know what their identity is, and they lean into that more than any other team thus far. Maybe bar Tasmania. Tasmania is figuring some things out as far as who they are. But the Illawarra Hawks look like they know who they are. They know what their strengths are. They know where the shots are coming from. Everyone knows the pace of play that they want to play at. And everyone's really confident in what they do personally. And that is meshing as far as team basketball. And so it's no surprise that they are where they are right now. Is this going to be the case in February, early March? Will other teams catch up? We'll see. But right now, they're in a tier of their own, I think.
So saying that the team knows what they're going to do offensively and where the shots are going to come from is a pretty good point. And it's why right now I would say by far, and people can look at it and say, well, they're top of the ladder. That's a big call by you. But this is why Justin Tatum is the coach of the year by a mile currently as it stands, because when you look at what he did last year, I thought he should have been coach of the year last year. He didn't get it. I understand you're an interim. You come in halfway through. But part of the storyline or narrative why you would win that award is because how you turned around this team immediately. They are now, I believe it's 23-12 under Justin Tatum. They were 2-7 when he took over this team. And Tyler Harvey is a perfect example of how this team has changed. He's always been a star in this league. We know that he can take over a game offensively, but we also knew that on a night-to-night basis, he was going to take bad shots. He was going to take early offense shots that at times can really hurt the team. He doesn't do that as much now. And the fact that he is willing to say, okay, Tacko, I understand it. You want to go out and get 32 points and have all the assists and take over this game, that's fine. On the next game, it might be Sam Frolin that takes over, and they really focus on pounding the paint, getting him back to the basket and dominating games. Then you can have guys coming off the bench with Lee shooting threes all over the place. Ulbrich can be a physical force down low as well. And then even someone like Darius Days, who's an import, looked like a star early in the season. Now he's coming off the bench and just playing a role as well. So Tatum has to get so much credit for how this locker room from the outside looks like. They are very happy with other players' success, which we know is not so simple in a league like this.
Especially because when he took over, from when he took over to even now, the team isn't that different.
No.
The imports are different, right? Trey Kell is an upgrade from... Trey Kell and Gary Clark, you can say sort of a like for like from a production standpoint. Darius Days is probably a slight upgrade on Justin Robinson, but we'll still see. He's still figuring some stuff out. But the team is not that different from when he took over, and they're playing at a completely different style of basketball. One person you didn't mention is Dave O'Hickey, who, again, comes off the bench and he picks up full court. They retain the same level of energy. And again, they just have so many different styles in which they can play. They can have Tacko coming off on balls and creating. They have Tyler Harvey coming off turnouts. Then Dave O'Hickey comes on the floor. Ulbrich is in there as this imposing force in the paint, and they surround them with shooters. And when the shooters are on the floor, they make sure they run actions for those shooters, which is why you're seeing Jung Lee get open looks. You're seeing Todd Blanchfield on the floor. Now, Mason Peatling was thrown into that starting lineup, and he is unbelievably effective in that role. So everyone knows their role. Everyone is empowered in it. I think the style of basketball fits exactly what the NBL is all about, as far as a high-powered offense, high-paced. And for me, earlier in the season, when it was you who mentioned the Illawarra Hawks very early on, I don't know if I believe it yet. I'm leaning toward believing it, but you said that they were the favorites, or at least your early favorites. I'm starting to believe it more because of how they've improved defensively over the past few weeks, and that's always the key. We look around the league at some of these teams who are just really bad defensively, and people get enamored by the offensive output from a lot of guys, but they almost get blinded to the fact that they don't guard. And if you want to win in February and March in the NBL, you have to guard. And the Illawarra Hawks are figuring that end of the floor out. And it's not just Wani Swaka-Labullock, who's been really impressive, but Trey Kell is guarding. Tyler Harvey is guarding. Sam Froling is important. So, again, this team is the most put together of any team in the NBL this season. But I think by a mile right now.
Yeah, so I looked it up before we started and we have a bit of fun with it when we talk about predictions or whatever, but I can tell you right now, we don't get them all right. It was about 3 weeks ago on this podcast when I said no team from Queensland was going to make the postseason. So I'm looking silly with the Brisbane one. So this isn't about saying that I was right, but it was October 14. So it was about 2 rounds into the season, 3 rounds in. And we had a discussion about the defense. But the reason why I thought that this team was going to, by the end of the season, be near the top was because I saw a game or I saw a quarter or I saw a half against a good team where they locked in defensively. And I still think the biggest question with this team, whether they finish on top of the ladder and don't find themselves back in the mix to try and avoid the playing tournament, is that I do think that they have gears on the defensive end. And that's why I was so confident they would win this game against Sydney, because this was not the type of game where they were going to coast defensively. I think that they can do that. And I think we've seen that against some bad teams. They can come up against Now, Perth is a good offensive team, but they'll come up against a Perth and they'll be like, we'll probably win this game. Yeah, we can try and stop Bryce Cotton like they did the other night, but then they've played a Perth team without Bryce and given up 30-plus points to Ben Henschel. Like, I think this team can coast at times, but I saw in the first 2 weeks that when they want to lock in, they have the athletes, they have the rotation and the depth that they can play defense. This can be a top 4 defense in the league. It's not a team that is going to be in the bottom 3 teams. And I think as long as they are in that mix, that top 3, top 4, the offense is so damn good. There's 6 points per 100 possessions better than any other team. They aren't just the best offense. They're the best offense by an absolute mile. And they would have blown out Sydney if they didn't take their foot off the gas and start trying to run down clock with 5 minutes to go. They went from playing offense and getting whatever they wanted in 10 to 12 seconds to saying, we need to take 24 off the clock every single possession. And because they did that, they let Sydney back in the game.
I think that's maybe discrediting Sydney's defense a little bit. I thought
you watch the possessions. Look at the possessions. It wasn't. They were dribbling out the clock. They in their minds, and this happens. And I don't think it's a bad thing for the Hawks to have this lesson. They went from trying to run offense to just, all right, Tyler Harvey's going to dribble out the clock because we want to take 20 off. Like whether it was intentional or not, they changed the way they were playing offense.
Yeah, I think it's completely almost separate. I thought Sydney should have had a larger lead in the second quarter.
Yeah,
I thought they should have won the game out a little bit more. So it probably ended up where I think it should have. There was an interesting moment. I was at the Illawarra Hawks Perth Wildcats game in Wollongong, and they did a really, really good job on Bryce Cotton. And again, this is a Hawks team that they haven't been a consistently amazing defensive team. But when they had a task at hand, when there was a very specific scout that they had to lean into, and the rules were really obvious and clear, and credit to Joel Carlu for the scout on Bryce Cotton in this game. But they had some rules that they had to lean into, and everyone held each other accountable. And, I watched this Illawarra Hawks bench, and anytime a rule was broken, either, on the help side or after the ball gets out of Bryce Cotton's hand, they were getting annoyed. And I think having that sort of game within a game for this Illawarra Hawks team, which is full of, fun, dynamic characters, I think that's a helpful thing. I think if they put that sort of like pride and fun into the defensive end, I think they can keep rising as far as their defensive efficiency goes. And honestly, that game against Perth was unbelievably expected. It was the best offense in the league, obliterating a horrible defense right now, and a team with so much defensive potential in the Hawks, locking in on the best scorer we've seen this generation in the NBL, maybe of all time in the NBL, and getting a 30, what should have been a 40-point win at home. That was a statement win from them on both ends of the floor.
A couple of notes to wrap this up, because I agree generally with the idea that Sydney probably walks away feeling okay. I think things weren't perfect. And the other thing I would say, you mentioned it in the first quarter, but overall there were 71 free throws in this game. Guys were in foul trouble, which messed up some of the rotations. And I know that's just part of the game, but it did change what happened a little bit. I thought it was fascinating. We've seen Lepepe come back into the starting lineup. And while everyone wanted to focus on Sam Frolin and Xavier Cooks in that individual matchup, Lepepe was guarding Frolin at the start of the game. And Frolin tried him on 3 or 4 occasions to back him down, and he just didn't move a millimeter. I thought they could have played him a little bit more. And then this is just continues to be a storyline. But Cam Oliver has 4 points. He plays 15 minutes. He was minus 11 in those 15 minutes. And we just spoke about the imports. And then Darius Days gets in foul trouble, but in his 15 minutes, they're plus 23. And just watching those two imports, one play the role, the other one just continues to struggle, and the team can't do anything defensively when he's on the floor. That continues to be a big storyline.
Yeah, the Kings, they just don't know how to maximize Cam Oliver. This coaching staff doesn't know where to put him. I don't think they mesh as far as what the coaching staff wants and what Cam Oliver's just general demeanor is. I don't think that really meshes. And it's the little things. It's something like getting back-to-back blocks, but blocking it out of bounds because that's really cool. Or it's end of the third quarter. There's like 29 seconds left on the clock, and you have an opportunity to roll it into Sean Bruce and get one possession. He whips it into Sean Bruce. I think Bruce, he hits a 3, and then Trey Kell has the opportunity to come down and hit a 3 to end the quarter. So little things like that as well, where it's just this Sydney Kings team can play cool sometimes. They can not be completely switched on, and I think that hurts them, especially in games like this, especially in that game against Melbourne a few weeks ago. I think they have to clean that stuff up. For a lot of people who are calling for, Cam Oliver's head, this Sydney Kings team is they've played a lot of games already. They're D-Day. So Gorge called it D-Day, right? As far as when we're officially going to be locked in as a team, as the Sydney Kings. That D-Day is January 9. They have a game against Melbourne United. That is the game in which if an import change or an import addition is going to be made, it has to be for that game so that import could play the 7 games required to play in the postseason. Now, for those who think that Cam Oliver is on the chopping block, I don't think he is. The Kings, from what I understand, they're not going to cut Cam Oliver. It is more likely that they bring someone in. That is something that is extreme, that is very on the table for the Sydney Kings team. They have signaled it privately. They've signaled it, Gorge has signaled it publicly as well. There is an import market out there that is not terrible. It's not amazing, but Gorge has been crying for another ball handler, and I think there's a better chance than not that they ultimately bring one in as the injury replacement for Jalen Galloway. Bull Kowal's in and out of the lineup with his knee injury, so you're not even using that second marquee spot. You might as well use your third import spot in place of that. And if Gorge really wants this ball carrier, it feels like the Kings are going to go get one.
Fascinating. It is getting towards that point in the season, as you pointed to, where you do need to bring in another guy, which does bring us to Brisbane. Let's talk about the Bullets a little bit. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. So they've now, I believe it's 6 out of the last 8 or 5 out of the last 7. They've been cooking anyway. They're playing well, particularly on the offensive end. And before that stretch, I said it. Now, I was 50% accurate because the Kansas Taipans haven't won a game since I said this. But it did not look like this Bullets team clearly had talent, whether it was Cook, whether it was Bateman, whether it was Prather, the local guys having the roster. Like, clearly this was a talented roster offensively, but they just weren't figuring it out. And I still am not 100% sure in my mind, because I don't think they're a great defensive team. I'm not 100% sure in my mind if they've all of a sudden figured it out and they're just going to keep winning through the rest of the season, or there are so many teams that are stumbling and having their own problems in the middle tier of this league. I'm not 100% sure, but the Bullets right now do look like a team. They're above 500. They're 9-8, where you need to see them. Okay, let's have some big tests against the best team. Now, we'll watch this game in a few hours' time. Illawarra, maybe they have a letdown after Christmas. I'm not sure, but this is a big test. But what have you liked about Brisbane? And I guess more importantly, I should ask you off the top, what's going to happen with this James Bateman injury?
By the time this podcast goes out, we won't know about an import yet.
Thanks. That was good. Thank you.
We'll more than likely know about an import.
I thought you were about to break something. You're like, by the time this pod drops, we'll know nothing. Okay.
You know what the problem is?
Well,
and I don't want to.
None of your problems.
Yeah. The problem is I'm not at liberty to say.
No.
But if we chose to drop this podcast on Saturday instead,
well,
I could probably name the import, but I can't do it right now.
Tell me after.
I'll tell you after.
Yeah. Thank you.
All I'll say is that James Bateman is out for the remainder of the season. He tore his hamstring. That is a big blow for them. He's a very important offensive piece for them. They will replace him with a sort of a like-for-like dynamic combo guard. Leans more toward a 2-guard. People in the NBL will know who this player is. The Brisbane Bullets, it feels like they look a lot more comfortable offensively. It looks like there's more flow. It looks like the spacing is way better. A lot of that is Casey Prather moving to the 4 spot. And I think that's opened up everyone's game. I think that's created spacing for Keandre Cook to perform really well. And I think he's been their most consistent player when it comes to the start of the season to now. I think he's been really, really impressive for this team. It's let Casey Prather sort of shine. If you put a bigger power forward on him, he'll take him off the dribble and use his speed and athleticism. If you put another wing player, he's got the strength to take them down low. He's got the veteran, IQ to score offensively. And then that's opened things up for Tyrell Harrison, who is practically averaging 15 and 10 right now. And so I think all of those things are clicking. I think just generally there's more familiarity, continuity with this offense. Seems like there's more rhythm and flow, and I think that's helping. And then every game they're getting a contribution from one of those 6th, 7th, 8th guys, whether that's Isaac White, like that Adelaide game, or it's Torrey Smith-Milner or Josh Bannon, even in that Adelaide game. That he was really important in the second half of that. So they're getting enough contributions from everybody. Again, the defense is concerning, and whether they have enough depth to really make noise at the end of the season, I don't know. But right now, their offense is carrying them. And that's sort of all you need at this point of the season. And an offense is something that can win you a play-in game as well.
Yeah, I was happy for Isaac White. I was a little bit thrown off that I saw, it might have been Moldovan that I think put on social media, I hope this is right, that it was his first start in the NBL. Is that correct?
First start. It surprised me too, because you think that some people get accidental starts, right? Injuries happen, or a coach says, all right, you're going to start here because this guy's coming off an injury. You just think you start just by happenstance. But he played 120 plus games in the NBL. It was just by random circumstance. He just hadn't started a game until this one.
And always been a pretty solid player as well. And he obviously had a nice shooting day and was able to score. But the moment where I was like, all right, this guy now is taking the piss. He is absolutely cooking, was when he took that off the dribble, wrong leg, fade away, mid-range. I was like, all right, this guy's feeling pretty damn good out there. So it was cool to see him have his moment. I'm happy for Justin Schuller, who, I said at the start, when he was publicly pretty scathing on the team and the way they were playing, I was like, man, this guy looks like he's under pressure. He clearly knows the locker room, and it looks like they're playing for him, which is awesome. I was curious whether they would look for a guy that does play a little more defense at the guard spot to replace Bateman because of Casey Prather. So it's interesting because when everyone talks about Prather, and this has been going on for 3 years, well, Casey Prather can come back. Oh, he's a star. He's going to do this. When he was putting up great numbers in the league, and go back to what it was 2017, 18, 19, around that stretch of time when he was in the league and doing great things. I was in the US and I wasn't watching the NBL in that period of time like we do now with this podcast and the shows we do. So it was always kind of like this mythical idea of Casey Prather can be a star in this league. And he got to 33 years old. And I'm like, well, it's probably not going to happen. I feel really bad for him. Clearly, he's had an unbelievable pro career, but he just doesn't seem like he can get fully healthy, and probably a lot of things going on as well there. But this last stretch, and I do think it's interesting, the conversation in the NBL, in the media or whatever it is, just so wildly goes from, wow, this guy's playing well, so all of a sudden he's top 3 in the MVP NBL standings, which is just like crazy to me.
It's a player of the week, Paul. That's just
it is wild to me. Like, he maybe by the end of the year, if he keeps playing like this for the back half of the season, he can be there. But this feels like just a reaction to Felix saying that he's played 3 good games. So they're like, no, we better put him in the top 3 in the MVP. I don't understand how it works. But in the first 9 games that he played this season, he was getting you 12.8 points per game. He was doing good things defensively. He looked like a fine NBL player. The last 7 games, 29.4 points per game, and the Bullets are 5-2, and he does look like an MVP guy. So the league doesn't have, I don't believe, the comeback player of the year or the story of the year, but Prather's on the top of that list. This is really fun. And if you look at the way that he scores, there aren't many wings that play that 3-4 position that have the strength that play the way that he plays. So 37% of his shots are coming at the rim. 37 are coming beyond the 3-point line, and the other 27 are in that mid-range, whether it's the floater or it is his post-up game that we've seen as well. So in terms of the all-round offensive package, I'm glad that I get to see it now, because I heard about how good this guy was, and we have seen over the last 9-10 games, he is legit. There aren't many guys that have the offensive package that he's got.
There's a lot of like Kawhi Leonard to the way he's operating offensively right now, as far as like the physical point of difference he has to other guys in the league too. And it's interesting because when he first got to Brisbane, I remember when he arrived, and I heard from people out there that they might send him home immediately because that's how concerning his knee looked. So he was coming off back-to-back knee injuries. He's playing in Israel, back-to-back knee injuries, got signed. He's not on a lot of money. This was basically a test for both parties. It was, we believe in, your potential to get back to a similar player to what you once were. And his hope was, I just need to get healthy and I need an opportunity to do it. And he's gotten to a point where he's physically in a really great place. He's shooting the ball at an insane level.
So over that stretch, Olgun, sorry to cut you off. He is 33 for 53 from 3, 62%. This is insane.
On a ton of attempts, and it's a slightly different style to what we saw from him almost a decade ago, where athleticism was a pillar of his game, and now he's regarded as this skilled four-man who's just really, really effective on this team. Again, MVP is all that chatter is very reactive and whatever. But I do like at least the sentiment of giving plaudits to people who are performing well on winning teams. That is something that is good. Now, can he continue this? Can he keep it up? The Brisbane Bullets have a really compact schedule toward the end of December and start of January. They play on Friday night against Illawarra. I think they've got one more, and then they have a game on, I believe, the 4th of January, and then one on the 7th of January. So it's a lot of games in quick succession. I would expect an import to be here by either that January 4, January 7 game, a new import, the James Bateman replacement. But can KCC Pereira continue this level of basketball with quick turnarounds like this? Well, let's see how his body holds up. So far, returns are good.
Yeah, it is, as I mentioned, a genuine feel-good story for the league. And it's also been cool. Obviously, his partner, Ariana, is on the sidelines as well, and they've had some cool moments, post-game interviews and those types of things as well. So, very cool. And Prather, hopefully he can continue to play the way we've been seeing over the last few weeks.
Can I say one more thing on this Brisbane game, and I'll track it back to some Illawarra games I've watched too. There's something that's annoyed me, which is so Isaac White, for example, gets first career starts hitting some shots, and the reaction was a lot of like, oh wow, like this will help confidence. Like who's this guy? And it's like we've known this guy. He dropped 18 points in a playing game not that long. He's done this on bigger stages. Like why are we treating him like he's a rookie or like this is some unknown player who's not relatively demonstrated in the NBL? It was the same with Mason Peatling a few weeks ago. He gets an O-board put back and everyone's like, oh, who thought he could do something like that? This started for a championship team a few years ago. Like we know these guys. I feel like we just have the NBL is very star centric right now. A lot of focus on Bryce Cotton, Montrezl Harrell, now and then Kendrick Davis. Now Casey Prather's doing well. Focus on him, but I feel like just a general awareness of everyone in the league is probably an important thing, and to treat these people like professional athletes and not as though these are just randoms that have just been picked up from the side of the street and thrown into a starting lineup.
Well, the depth does matter, to your point there, which might be a good segue to the Tassie JackJumpers, who now they continue to go on a streak. They now won 7 in a row. Certainly some questions with the first 5 of those games. I know I had a conversation on Twitter with someone, and it was a Tassie fan who was like, well, here we are again, Tassie are back. And I was like, maybe they're back. But if you look at who they've beaten, I think we still need to figure out what this team looks like against some of the best. They beat Melbourne. I do want to talk about Melbourne a little bit, but the Melbourne win was impressive, particularly offensively in that first quarter. They're shooting the 3 so well over these last 2 games. They did again on Christmas. That probably got them those wins. But I think that this Tassie team, to me, reminds me more of the Tassie team we saw in year 1 and year 2, where they were very good, and they're back to being a really tough defensive team, which we know, history tells us, keeps you in games. And they're just getting little spot contributions all over the place from guys down the roster. Majuk Deng has been big over the last few games. He's again looking like he's an offensive spark off the bench for this team. Ruben Tarangi in the last 2 games has probably scored more than I remember him scoring in back-to-back games for quite a while. And they've done it really without Milton Doyle taking over games. Jordan Crawford's coming off the bench. So I think last year this team looked like they were more star-studded. Obviously, you had Magnay there, you had Jack McVeigh there. So this reminds me of year 1 and 2. Tassie, I'm not putting them in the top tier that I think can win the title, but because of how consistent they've become and the contributions they're getting, it does look like that first year. And I think Ian Hummer coming in looks like this. I think he's as advertised. I know it's only 2 games, but he's not going to be a star for this team. He's going to do the dirty work. He's going to play as a small big man. He'll hit the glass and maybe get a few points here or there.
That's the problem, though. So Tasmanian years 1 and 2 were still one star away.
Yeah, that's right.
One significant piece away. And that's not discrediting their current run. To discredit their current run, there's probably one quality win over these 7 games. And again, you have to beat who's in front of you. That's just the reality of it. And that is impressive. The really good teams beat who they're supposed to beat, and that's what they're doing. And then the win over Melbourne was impressive. Again, I think Milton Doyle's shooting it better over this stretch than he did to start. Sean McDonald has not lost a game with Tasmania this season. That is important. Jordan Crawford off the bench. I think I'm surprised we didn't see it. We would have seen it earlier if Sean McDonald was healthy. But it seemed like a really clear change that this team should have made just because of how dynamic Jordan Crawford can be and that spark that he can bring. But yeah, they're playing really good basketball. They are, over this stretch, probably hovering around the league average over that stretch offensively, which is a really good place to be considering they started as a horrendous offensive team. And they've stayed right around where they have been all season long defensively as a top 2 or 3 defense. That is how you're going to win games consistently. They're not a team that I want to play in the playoffs just because they are organized and they do guard and they do have a Milton Doyle or a Jordan Crawford or someone who can just drop 30 points at any moment. So they would be a scary proposition. But as far as going all the way, putting it in the context of if they could win a championship, I still think they are a star away. I don't think Ian Hummer is that guy. Ian Hummer is a solid guy who can help their defense continue tracking along as it has been. But yeah, I'm not going to be super reactive to this streak. I'm still trying to look at this as critically as I can and think, I think they needed one more piece and there's no opportunity to come get that.
Yeah, they are, in terms of the teams that have now placed themselves in the mix. And by the way, like you're exactly right. You win 7 games in a row in this league, it can't be dismissed because of how even it is in those middle tiers. And they've beaten some of those teams. They've handled those teams. But they are the anti-Brisbane, they're the anti-Perth, they're the anti-Adelaide, who are all offense, no defense. This Tassie team is the opposite. And you see that they can swing games and they win those games by playing defense. And if you have a night where you hit a bunch of threes, you're going to probably win. And we saw that with that first quarter against Melbourne where they put up 36 points. We saw it against New Zealand. New Zealand couldn't hit a shot from the three-point line, from the free throw line, from anywhere. And Tassie were able to scrape out. In the end, the lead blew out a little bit on Christmas and everyone was happy there. It was good to see. So Tassie back in the mix. Feels like the NBL is back to normalcy now with that team winning games. It was a little bit odd at the start of the season. Melbourne is one team I want to touch on. New Zealand just quickly, because you put up some clips about Tacko Fall and the defense, and it was against Sydney, a game where New Zealand played pretty well. They played pretty well against Tassie as well. They just didn't hit those shots. Like they gave up, but they left a lot of points on the table. Tacko Fall just remains such a conundrum for me because if you just look at the box score and you watch the game, he was impactful in the game against Sydney. I think he was a plus 15 in the end in his 20 minutes in a close game. He was impactful against Tasmania as well. But when you put up those clips of the 3-point shots, it's almost like by having him on the floor, everything changes for New Zealand. Like, I don't think that Tacko Fall on New Zealand could really do anything else with those defensive coverages against the Sydney Kings. They had the defense set up with obviously Tacko Fall trying to hang around the free throw line. So Sydney's like, all right, we'll set a double drag screen, then we'll get Jalen Adams one-on-one with Tacko. So New Zealand blew that up. And by blowing that up, you still were one pass away from an open three. It was quite annoying. He knocked it down. It was almost like if you choose to have Tacko Fall on the floor, they're going to get a matchup one way or the other, and there's really not much you can do about it. And then the secondary part of this is he can't hit a free throw. So if I'm an opposition team, just foul it. So this is the conundrum with him. I wonder whether you can afford to play him late in games, even though we've seen that he's been relatively impactful. The other question I've got is, what has this done to Sam Menenga? And I know they started him on Christmas Day and they put Tacko Fall on the bench, but they don't work. And I think it's challenging for a team when you have one guy on the floor, you go, well, our whole offense now is put Tacko Fall under the basket and try and pass in the ball. Your defense can only play one way. And then when he goes to the bench, all of a sudden now you're asking to play a different way again. It just looks really challenging to make this work. Even if I'm not hating on him, the numbers on the box score looked pretty good the last couple of games.
And there's a broader conversation, which I don't think now is the time for it, as far as bringing in a player for a specific reason, and then that has an impact on the local player that you signed for multiple seasons. I don't know if that's a healthy thing for chemistry, for morale, or for the development of that player. We've seen the exact same thing in Adelaide. You have Isaac Humphrey signed for 3 seasons. You bring Montrezl Harrell in, who is a cool spark plug and a good marketing tool. But is he the guy that's going to impact winning? So far, he hasn't been. So what are you abandoning from a sustainability standpoint just to bring in a really cool type of player? So that's a separate conversation that we could probably delve into another time. Yeah. But
I know you're not saying this, but I will just put it on the record. There is a significant difference between Montrezl Harrell and Tacko Fall. Before anyone says anything, like they are not in the same
I agree. Broadly, the point is the same,
Yeah.
but Montrezl Harrell is a productive NBL player who you can fit into systems here. Tacko Fall is and that's the problem. Tacko Fall is just so unique as a player that you have to change everything. The entire identity that you had coming into the season, you have to scrap it every time Tacko Fall is on the floor, purely because of what he is. And yes, he brings some unique things that no one else in world basketball can do, but if you want to play fast with Parker Jackson Cartwright, which is what I assume a Parker Jackson Cartwright team would want to do, you just can't do that with Tacko Fall on the floor. With those clips that I put up, the problem is Tacko Fall can only guard one player on that floor, who's Xavier Cooks. And if he's not guarding Xavier Cooks, then everything else goes to shit. And that's just unfortunately the reality. Whereas if that's any other big man in the league, if that's Sam Froling, or if that's Geordie Hunter, or if that's Keanu Pinder, if they switch onto someone, then they have the requisite amount of mobility to still be functional. Whereas Tacko Fall just doesn't have the ability to do that. So one mess up and you get no grace. You get a player is wide open. And that's just the reality of having Tacko. The plus side is that New Year's Eve is Cairns versus New Zealand, where one of those teams is going to win. I hope. Probably get rained out or something. But one team will get a win, and that'll be a nice thing because I can feel the dread in Adam Ford's eyes every time he has to go into a press conference and he has to inevitably answer, must be proud of the fight back of whatever, and what did you like from that? And it's just it feels I feel bad for these guys, and it's the same with Patrick Hoffman.
Yeah, Cairns again. I thought they were decent against Melbourne last night. Clearly inept offensively in the first half, but I thought Groves was pretty good. If they got anything from Taron Armstrong and Rob Edwards, then they put themselves in a chance in a spot to potentially win that game. Which leads me to my last question for you today, because it's been a robust podcast. I gotta head down the road. I got work to do. Something or nothing. Melbourne beating Cairns.
That's but no, nothing. As in, that's a team that should beat that team. If anything, like Cairns should be better than they are. This is disappointing from Cairns. They're not completely injured right now. Like they should be getting more wins than they are. That this is disappointing from them. Melbourne, it was a bad game. I don't want to talk about that game. It was one of the worst games I've ever seen in my life. It was players missing a ton of threes. Outside of Chris Golding hitting some cool ones, it was otherwise boring and largely unwatchable.
So a couple of notes I do have, because I do agree.
You wrote notes on that game?
No, well, just in general in Melbourne, because I know Melbourne lost to Tassie a couple of days ago, and the first quarter was jarring. I think the first quarter, Dean Vickerman probably still is waking up in a cold sweat thinking about the defense in that first quarter against Tassie. It was as bad as it's been since the start of November for this Melbourne team. That was the low point. It was just layups. It was wide open threes. It was just silly turnovers. I just can't remember Melbourne playing a quarter like that. It was absolutely disgusting. But I thought in the last three quarters in that game, they figured some stuff out and they started to turn the corner. And I know they lost, but you can easily make the case the reason they lost that game was because Rob Lowe lost his cool and got ejected from the game, because in the 2 minutes or the 3 minutes after that ejection, Tassie went on a 14-6 run and steadied when it looked like they were going to lose. So I know Melbourne lost the game against Tassie, but I thought they figured some stuff out defensively. And sure, Cairns is clearly low on confidence, and every miss, you could see it on their faces that they were like, here we go again. This is happening to us again. But still, to have Cairns in that first half stranglehold where they couldn't score and Melbourne was up by 20 points, they took their foot off the gas a little bit. Cairns deserves some credit. But I do think the last two games we've seen some signs defensively of this Melbourne team starting to turn it around again. And we've seen historically they can get it done on the road. So I don't think they should have great fears about this January road trip that they have. And you mentioned Chris Golding. The other point is they'll probably win the game against Tassie if he plays more minutes. And the importance of him you talk about guys that are in the MVP conversation. I know he's missed some games, but damn, this Melbourne team is just completely different when he's on the floor.
Yeah, Melbourne, it's why I'm not super reactive to this losing streak that they've gone on. I don't put them in the same camp as a Perth or an Adelaide, because this team has demonstrated the ability to defend. Now, they went on a stretch where they weren't guarding, and their defense has been bad over the past few weeks. But the last 2 games, they figured some stuff out that they were nailing to start the season. So, again, that is a good sign to that team. Offensively, they've been largely fine. And so you trust the Dean Vickerman team's defense. You trust the personnel on that team as far as their ability to make sure that the defense gets back on track. Like, I'm not overreacting to that. I still put them in not the top tier, obviously, because Illawarra is sort of alone there, but they're still in the mix of a team that will contend for the championship because they've demonstrated this before. Whereas I compare that to Perth and Adelaide, these have been bad defensive teams for a good amount of years, but throughout the entire season. So I don't see that changing in any way, and I don't think the personnel is conducive to that.
No, I think that's right. And, Marcus Lee came back in. I think that just helps the rotation in general, particularly the big man rotation, particularly with defensive stuff. We saw him start the game against Cairns yesterday. I don't know if you know whether that was punishment for Rob Law or what, or it just was this makes sense for us from a rim protection athlete standpoint. Either way,
I think it was
a good move.
I think it was that. But and I agree. And all of the metrics point to this team being way better defensively when Marcus Lee's on the floor. So him being out for that stretch of games is not something that we can look over just because Marcus Lee's not the most productive guy in the world. He is an extremely effective defender, and he changes their defense in a very material way.
No question. So bizarre that Melbourne lost a bunch of games in a row there, but I think there's some signs if you're a United fan that they've started to turn things around. Hey, bunch of teams we didn't get to today. We'll podcast again next week. We'll find a little gap in the schedule and make sure we knock this out. I believe there's no game Monday, so we might be back to regular scheduling there. But if you subscribe, then you'll know when the podcast drops. So subscribe and drop a rating and do all those things. We appreciate that. NBL continues to be fascinating. Perth, Adelaide, Southeast Melbourne. We should probably talk about them. So we'll try to hit a bunch of those teams for good or bad reasons when we catch up after this weekend's NBL. Only one day off from before Christmas to the 6th of Jan. So there's plenty of hoops, and you can watch it all on ESPN. Olgun, you train just in between the games, in between the articles, in between nothing but net. Just grab yourself a little breather. Look after yourself, my friend.
I've been going to the beach every day. It's been beautiful here in Sydney.
Take it back.
No.
I'm about to drive into ESPN headquarters in Bristol. I'm going to put on 6 jackets, a beanie, a scarf, and I think it's about minus 10 degrees. So you enjoy the beach. Everyone else, enjoy hopefully having some time off work over this period if you're lucky enough to do so. And as I said, ESPN.com.au, nothing but net, everything on ESPN right throughout the week. Enjoy it. It's a great time of year to be a basketball fan. Olgun, we'll catch you next week, my friend.
Merry Christmas.